Rated S for scale. Oh, wait, it was T for teen. All right. Oh, what flashing images? All right, folks. Already my video is getting off to a crazy start. I am the heir of Skaven, and welcome back to another State of the Faction video, and I hope y'all are excited. Well, actually, the rat men don't exist, so whatever we're discussing today, just forget it because they don't exist to begin with. But let's go ahead and continue to discuss that thing that doesn't exist, which is the Skaven. So the Skaven were the fourth race in Total War Warhammer 2, and CA kind of hid them for the longest time, even though there was definite and clear hints of the Skaven coming in as a launch race in Warhammer 2. And eventually we got this trailer here, which caused flashing, and, of course they had to warn us that we might be about to get Skaven seizures from that flashing. But in any case, a lot of people were very excited to see the Skaven in the game. They were a very, exciting faction, probably especially for those who enjoyed them back in the Warhammer Fantasy Battle days. I, of course, wasn't involved in Warhammer Fantasy Battle, so I didn't know anything. I was just watching us get dinosaurs and rats and all kinds of stuff, and I absolutely loved it. But in any case, yeah, the Skaven were a little bit underwhelming for me personally at launch, but then they started to get a ton of DLC, and they got a ton of attention. And honestly, when we saw Ichiklaw come out, for me, it just really upped the ante in terms of what we expected from DLC from then on out. I mean, holy crap. The Skaven really changed. If you look at that, and we will look at it later, the laboratory for Ichiklaw and later the laboratory for Throt, they really changed what people expected in terms of what they got with their DLC. So the Skaven were here. Again, even though they don't exist, yes. Get your Warpstone popcorn ready, all right? And start to skitter leap around the room because, folks, it's here. We're going to talk about the state of the faction for the Skaven in Total War Warhammer 2. The Skaven. So much cheese, so much scheming, and so much fun, I guess, if you enjoy all that crazy rat scheming and Warpstone. Let's get things started by taking a look at the campaign start positions for their 6 legendary lords. And yes, they are at 6. The Lizardmen still the standout at having 7 amongst the base factions, at least. There's not that many with the DLC factions from Game 2, which is probably understandable, right? They didn't have 2 lords there to begin with. But yeah, let's take a look at those start positions. Queek is in the Charnel Valley, so he's got a southeasterly position on the start. Lord Skrulk is in Lustria. Tretch Craventail is in Nagaron. Ichiklaw is just east of Estalia. Deathmaster Snitch is in the Shadowlands at the far east of the map. And Throt the Unclean is actually starting at Hell Pit, north of the Old World, slightly right before you head into the Norskin waste there. So really unique start positions for all 6 Skaven lords, which is nice to see. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the lord effects for the different Skaven lords. I just don't know if it's really necessary to have in the video. This is something that every faction has. If there's something really neat in particular, like for instance the fact that Tretch gets 13 melee attack for running away from a battle and then being caught after running away. So by fleeing, his Skaven are inspired to fight harder. So there you go. There's one very rare and unique trait. But yeah, not something I feel like we really need to cover here. So I don't want to go through those just for the interest of time. And I just, again, not sure that it's terribly important. Now, quickly here, let's take a look at the Eye of the Vortex campaign. All 6 Skaven lords are playable in Vortex, and they again have unique starts. Queek this time is in the southern jungles. Skrulk is in the Lost Valley. Tretch is in the Clawed Coast. Ichiklaw in the Volcanic Islands, so a change here. He's moved from Estalia to near Lustria. Deathmaster Snitch moved west into the land of the Dervishes. And Throt the Unclean is actually moved all the way to Nagaron rather than being in Hell Pit. So honestly, this is very good. The Skaven have 6 unique campaign starts in both campaign maps, Mortal Empires and Vortex. So as far as that goes, they're grade A in terms of being very diversified with campaign starts. Let's go start diving into their campaign though. What are the Skaven's unique mechanics? Are they good? Do they hold up late in the development of Warhammer 2? So I have loaded up a Queek Headtaker campaign in Mortal Empires here. And you can see, again, that start position we talked about here in the Charnel Valley. And the unique mechanics for Skaven in the base Total War Warhammer 2 game are the food mechanic. And of course, Queek has this extra bit here because he's also in a race for Karak 8 Peaks with Belagar and Skarsnik. So that is something a little bit unique to Queek at this point. So the food is something you gather when you're winning battles from schemes and all that other kind of stuff. There's some buildings that produce it. And the amount of food you have plays into either debuffs or buffs for your faction to, as you can see here at the top end, when food is plentiful, you're getting a ton of extra growth and really fuels the Skaven, growth of their settlements so that you can get better units, better economy, all that kind of stuff. And it also helps with public order and leadership when you're in allied territory. Not particularly exciting buffs. I mean, they're okay. It's not bad. And this isn't a terrible mechanic, but it's honestly a bit forgettable. Probably more entertaining is the Skaven Under Empire, which basically means you can take agents to enemy settlements. You can perform an agent action on that settlement and possibly establish an Under Empire, which you would then be able to see. And you can build buildings in it that give you maybe extra income, that debuff that enemy settlement. And then if you're playing as Ichiklaw and others, you can literally just blow up that settlement if you continue it for long enough, like literally blow it off the map, which is pretty entertaining. So I think the Skaven Under Empire is pretty good. It's a more interesting mechanic, in my opinion, than something like the Geomantic Web from the Lizardmen. And I think it's probably the better mechanic for the Skaven. The food mechanic is a little bit lame. They do spread Skaven corruption, which is understandable. I mean, these guys are going around spreading feces at an alarming rate, so not surprised that there's corruption spreading all over the map underneath their feet. But anyway, this is going to be the same mechanics, except for just remove the Karak 8 Peaks. It's going to be exactly the same for Skrulk and for Tretch. Tretch, who was a free LC lord, added a little bit further into the game. So the first 3 Skaven lords, pretty dry mechanics, but at the same time kind of in line with what we're used to for early term Total War Warhammer 2 in-game faction mechanics in a campaign. So nothing out of line, but not impressive. Something that we maybe hope to see a little bit more added to at some point, and I'll show you why. Ichiklaw is the reason why. In my opinion, Ichiklaw changed the nature of the expectations that I have for unique in-game mechanics. So here is his Mortal Empires campaign start. You can see the food thing remains here, and that's fine. But he has a currency called Warp Fuel. And you can use the Warp Fuel and food in a very special campaign mechanic called the Forbidden Workshop. In the Forbidden Workshop, you use that fuel to upgrade all of the contraptions that Ichiklaw and Clan Scryer create, like Doom Flayers, Doom Wheels, Weapon Teams, Doom Rockets. Yes, folks, Doom Rockets. These are insanely powerful explosives that you can use on the battlefield that can do tremendous damage. Basically eliminate anything that's within the circle of its destruction. And destruction is, probably an understatement. It is insane what the Doom Rockets do. But this laboratory, in my opinion, like I said, changed what we expected. It gave this faction such a unique mechanic, and it let you focus where you want. Do you want to mess with Doom Flayers and make them awesome because you like them? Go for it. And they get insane, like the amount of stuff that you can add to them. Doom Wheels, same thing. Maybe you really enjoy playing with Doom Wheels. Or maybe you have a favorite weapon team like Rattling Guns, and you can upgrade them, give them extra ammunition, reduce the reload time, give them endless drum. It's absolutely insane. Like, they just start replenishing ammunition when they're below a certain amount. So this is awesome. Like, this kind of stuff is absolutely awesome. It lets the player come through, add something unique to their campaign, play it the way they want, and see themselves rewarded for really digging into the campaign gameplay, and rewarded for taking the time to come and play the new Lord and his faction. So it really makes it interesting, and I think this is a good job by CA, and it kind of reset the expectations for basically everything else in the game. It would be nice to see something like this for all, not just Skaven lords, but for all lords in Total War Warhammer 2, period. And I say that, really, I should be saying Total War Warhammer 3, because the development's done on this game, and anything that gets changed is going to need to be done in Game 3. So the first 3 Skaven lords didn't have anything terribly unique. Ichiklaw kind of reset the bar of expectations for the entire game, again, my opinion. So what about the 2 Skaven lords who followed Ichiklaw? Did they end up with something comparable and good? Well, I think so, and we're here with Clan Eshin and Deathmaster Snitch in his start in the Far East in the Shadowlands. So speaking of Game 3, he's starting where we expect the action to be hot and heavy in Game 3, potentially. So let's take a look at his special campaign mechanics, which are called Shadowy Dealings. So essentially, there's this scheme available, stuff up here, and then clan contracts. So clan contracts allow you to use your agents to go perform certain schemes. You can see the cost and the number of schemes. Some of them take more than one, but essentially you can steal money. You can, see this says grants ownership over a rival Skaven army. If led by a legendary lord, they do not join your faction. But I mean, you can do all this crazy scheming stuff, and it's pretty fun. This is very Skaven-y type stuff. So really, really neat stuff to see. And you basically use your legendary lords, your legendary lord, your lords, and your heroes to perform these schemes. You can also do clan contracts you can carry out, and you can try and gain the favor of other clans. It's like, for instance, if you get Clan Moors really liking you, then you get a massive recruitment cost reduction for Clan Rats and Storm Vermin, because those are considered Clan Moors units, and so on. You can do the same with Molder, Scryer, and Pestilence. So this is a pretty cool addition to the game, and if you're taking a look at how Eshin plays, it's very nice. So again, I think CA was on par in giving Deathmaster Snitch something unique and something fun that would bring you back. Not to mention he plays very different than Ichiklaw in terms of the battlefield as well. So I think Clan Eshin, Deathmaster Snitch, they're in good shape here as well. Are you always hungry? Do you always need to eat and, maybe mutate some stuff in the background? Well, Throt is your boy, and here we are loaded into his campaign in Mortal Empires. And let's check out his unique mechanic. And he gets a laboratory too. In some ways similar to Ichiklaw, in other ways very different. And basically, Throt is working to obtain all the time more mutagen. He also has the growth vat here. And you can put more juice into the growth vat by winning battles. So that you can recycle units from buildings, all that kind of stuff. And then you can basically extract monsters out of it. But then you also have this mutagen going on over here, and you can use the mutagen in the lab over here to make augments to your monsters, to your infantry units, and then you have this laboratory thing that you can do and do all kinds of cool upgrades as well. So Throt also hit the jackpot in terms of getting really excellent treatment from CA in terms of giving the player something very unique in the flesh laboratory while maintaining the other stuff that the Skaven have. So again, Throt, along with Deathmaster Snitch and Ichiklaw, are all in an excellent position in terms of offering you a very unique campaign mechanic that should want to bring players in order to play every single faction. And for me, that's really important. That's something I want in my Total War. I want a game that gives me a reason to come play every faction, and I would hope that we see stuff like this in historical Total Wars as well. Give me a dadgum reason to come back and play the Arverni versus Rome versus Carthage versus Seleucids, right? Otherwise, I'm just going to end up playing the ones that are kind of on my personal favorites list. Like the Skaven, for instance, I would have never touched a Skaven campaign. They just weren't that interesting to me. However, when they started adding all these unique mechanics, I went and played an Ichiklaw campaign, and I had a blast. And then I played Throt's campaign, and I had a blast. So we need to be seeing this kind of thing from all Total War games in the future, not just those that are in the Warhammer version of Total War. I want to see it in all of them. So that's all the campaign starts and mechanics. We've got some very unique stuff for the last 3 factions that came in for the Skaven. Again, in my opinion, they kind of set the bar for what we as players expect for the other factions in campaign. So good stuff to see from the Skaven. Probably an A+ in terms of unique campaign starts, both in Vortex and Mortal Empires. And then they're in slightly better shape maybe than some of the other factions because they have 3 legendary lords that have really good systems. But then again, some of the other factions have 4 legendary lords that have something slightly unique at least. So I don't know. They're right up there. They're in the running. they're in decent shape, although we'd like to see something unique added to those 3 legendary lords who don't have specifically unique campaign mechanics. And like usual, we're going to spend the final part of this episode of the State of the Faction for the Skaven digging into their roster and taking an in-depth look at their units, determining where their strengths are at, and then determining where their weaknesses are at. Let's get started, as always, with the infantry. Now, Skaven infantry is, quite simply put, large in number, low in quality. That's probably the best way to describe them. However, they do have quite a bit of diversity amongst their infantry, which kind of helps make up for the low in quality piece. Now, sometimes low in quality is intentional, like with Skaven slaves. Skaven slaves have both a sword and spear variant. They are dirt cheap. They literally have the expendable trait because they're expendable. They're meant to be used as cannon fodder and charge bait and artillery bait and stuff like that. These Skaven have no respect whatsoever from the rest of the army and are complete throwaway. Clan rats are just a rank above that. They can kind of do a little bit of fighting in certain circumstances. They have a sword and spear variant and then shielded variant for both, so that's 4 in total. They are still very low in price. They are large in number at 120 unit size, and they're cheap to upkeep and bring into the campaign, though don't expect a ton of performance out of them. However, they will perform better than the Skaven slaves. Then you move on to Warp Grinders, and you start to get into some of the specialty infantry for the Skaven. Warp Grinders are an area of control unit that can try and keep stuff away from your precious missile infantry, and yes, it is precious. We'll be talking about that soon. But yeah, Warp Grinders have a special ability that can basically lock down enemy units who come within that 40 meters, and then they can cause direct damage to them. They also have some AP damage. They're a little bit slow, and they're small in number and due to the entity size, though they have a bit more armor. And these units are great at basically slowing stuff down and keeping them out of your back lines. And then maybe helping to do some damage to some high-value enemy targets like cavalry. Then we move on to Eshin Triads, who came in along with Clan Eshin and Deathmaster Snitch. These are relatively quick-moving. You can see their speed here. And of course, most Skaven infantry actually are fairly fast-moving. And they are good at taking out large targets, but they don't really want to be charged in return, right? So they take a big charge from heavy cavalry, they're going to take a lot of damage because they don't have much armor or defense. But if they get into that fight afterwards, so again, maybe you use your clan rats or your Skaven slaves as bait, and then you throw in the Eshin Triad, they're going to do very well against armored large because they are geared towards it. So interesting unit there. Plague Monks are similar. They're a specialist unit. Low armor, they need physical resistance in order to even survive very long in combat, but they're an anti-infantry as long as that infantry does not have armor. Their speed is pretty good. They can actually catch up to some skirmishers and stuff as well. Again, like most Skaven infantry, they're pretty fast. Death Runners give you the the anti-armor anti-infantry option, so they're a little different than the Plague Monks because they are supposed to go after armor. They still rely on physical resistance, but these guys are Vanguard deploy, and they are a stock unit, and they also have a special concealment bomb, which makes them extremely difficult to spot if they're used properly, and they're really good at ambushing early in a battle. You don't want them to go in completely unsupported, though. They can't handle that kind of fight. Their leadership is decent for Skaven units, but they're just not quite up to par to operate completely on their own, so have a plan put together, and they'll be very good at ripping through armor. Then we get to Storm Vermin with Halberds, which are probably one of the few fairly well survivable Skaven units, if you can say that about Skaven at all. They have good armor. Their melee defense is still pretty bad, but they're Skaven, and they come in a number of 120 still. They are AP and anti-large, and they're one of the Skaven's best tools at tearing down large enemies. Then we get Plague Monk Censer Bearers, which are kind of an upgraded version of Plague Monks that do go after armor. They still rely on that physical resistance. They even have this contaminated thing here, which hurts enemy leadership, and they also possess Frenzy, where they're going to get a lot of extra buffs as long as their leadership is still in the positive. And speaking of leadership, again, for Skaven, not bad at 72. That's going to be some of the better leadership you get. And then you have Storm Vermin with Sword and Shield, and I don't really know why this unit exists other than to die more slowly, because it's not good at a whole lot else. Like, it's got probably the best melee defense and survivability of other Skaven infantry, but it's not particularly good at killing stuff. So maybe decent against low armor infantry if you're playing against a lot of that, but kind of useless against anything elite. But that's the Skaven infantry. Like I said, large in number, low in quality, but they also have a pretty decent diversity of specialties. out there. And what you need that infantry for is to help protect your missiles. This is where the Skaven are really going to shine. They have everything from lowly Skaven slave slingers all the way up to poison wind mortars. And these two could not be more on the opposite end of the spectrum, both in cost and deadliness. Skaven slave slingers, though, are good at being charge bait and just doing some damage to low armored units for extremely cheap. And as we start to move up, you're going to see some interesting stuff. You got Night Runners and Night Runner slings. The runner version is going to have a 360-degree firing arc in a much shorter range, but they're going to be good for getting onto the flank and harassing enemy units. The slinger version is going to give you a little more range, but they're going to need to operate behind your line because they do not have a 360-degree firing arc. Both these units are Vanguard deploy. Then we get Poison Wind Globadiers and Warp Fire Throwers, who are kind of short-range missile specialists. Poison Wind Globadiers are going to be good against armor, and they have this Poison Wind effect, which continues to do damage over the next 10 seconds. So they are very good at hitting high armor, or just anything that's blobbed if you get these Poison Wind Globadiers, but they have to be very close, and they're pretty vulnerable. They do have good armor, they don't have shields, and they will get shredded by a lot of incoming fire because of their short range, so you have to take care of them. Same thing with Warp Fire Throwers. However, Warp Fire Throwers do a ton of damage to almost anything they shoot. They also have this burnt effect, which takes away leadership. They will do a horrendous amount of damage, and if something is ethereal, they have magic ammunition. They will just absolutely melt through ethereal stuff. So Warp Fire Throwers, again, a high-risk, high-reward unit here. If you can keep it close, because it does have to be close at 80 range, they will do tremendous damage to your enemies. Then we get Gutter Runner Slingers, which again are the longer range version that needs to operate behind a line. And they really change things by adding the snare net and some physical resistance. So they're sneakily survivable because whatever's chasing them is going to get slowed down. And then they have physical resistance that makes them a little bit tougher than what they look like, both in terms of being shot at and chased down. And the Gutter Runners are the 360-degree firing arc version, like we saw earlier. And then we move on to the poison version of the same Gutter Runners. And these ones have poison attack and poison missile strength. So on top of having the snare that slows things down, their poison is also going to slow things down. And remember, poison also impacts weapon damage. So it's, again, going to make them sneakily survivable. And then, again, the Gutter Runners are a 360-degree firing arc version of it. And, again, they can fire while moving. These are extremely effective. The Gutter Runners are, with poison, slowing down enemy flanks and causing a lot of damage and being a general nuisance. Then we move on to some of the specialty weapon teams up here that are really fun. We're going to get the Rattling Gun weapon team. And their range is limited. It's only 145, but their firepower is tremendous. And it comes with the suppressed effect, which is a minus 35% hit to speed. That is huge. And it's armor piercing to boot. So these rats are going to cause tremendous damage inside this 145 meter range because you're going to be slowed down so much that charging them quickly is not really an option. They are very slow and very vulnerable, but they cause a ton of damage. Then you get Warplock Jezzails, who are also very slow. They have a shield though, so they're a lot less vulnerable to skirmishers, still vulnerable to a melee. But these are character snipers or large target snipers. They're very good from range with armor piercing, and then they have a shield breaking effect that's going to make units with shields more vulnerable to incoming fire, which could be useful if coupled with the rest of your skirmishers, or just good for helping with the next Jezzail volley. When these units first came out, they were straight up OP. Their range was even longer, and they did even more damage. They were very, very strong. They got nerfed. I think they're in about the right spot right now. They cause really good damage to single entities, to large targets and stuff from range, and they're a very useful unit. Then you get Deathglow Bombardiers, which are kind of a grown-up version of the Poison Wind Globadiers. They cause a lot of armor-piercing damage. They still have magic ammunition, but again, they're a huge risk because you have to bring them within the range of 85 meters in order to get any hits. They do have decent armor, but they're not going to be survivable in any type of a melee. Then we move on to the final unit here, which is our Poison Wind Mortars. Poison Wind Mortars are absolutely fantastic. I didn't even really like Skaven campaigns that much until I discovered Poison Wind Mortars in the Throt campaign. And I think CA nerfed them, and they're still really good. Oh my gosh, Poison Wind Mortars are good. Like, they absolutely delete enemy infantry. Their range is not stellar, but if you couple them with one of the artillery pieces that we're going to talk about soon, they can be very safe because of the cover of the artillery fire, and the enemy infantry will totally get annihilated or at least damaged so badly that they can't face your Skaven infantry. And this is a great way to level the playing field between your Skaven infantry and enemy infantry, which tends to be better. So Poison Wind Mortars come with the HeirofCarthage seal of approval for sure, in terms of probably the best unit on the Skaven roster, especially if you end up in like a river crossing battle or some other type of choke point. They are absolutely bonkers. Really good units. Now let's move on to what I consider to be another strength for the Skaven. They don't have quite as many units here as, say, the Lizardmen, but the monsters and beasts section of the Skaven roster is definitely another one of their strong sides. They have wolf rats at the low end. There's a standard version which does a little bit of AP, and another version which is poison, which of course does poison. You have to kind of pick which one you want depending on what you're going for. They are very fast moving. They can get in and harass skirmishers and other stuff like that. They can be handy in that regard. They can chase down routing units. And chasing down routing units is pretty important early into a campaign, sometimes later in a campaign as well. But these are good early for campaign or in multiplayer if you just need some speed to harass an enemy flank. Then, speaking of speed, Rat Ogres are kind of the cavalry for the Skaven. They don't have a proper cavalry unit, but the Rat Ogres are pretty quick moving, slow for cavalry, but fast for monstrous infantry. And they come with some very nice armor-piercing effects, which really allow them to do good damage to heavily armored, fast-moving targets, and they can be a great way to protect your flank. And they do come with Frenzy, so their stats get buffed a little as long as their leadership stays up. Leadership's not great, though, so you may have a hard time keeping that Frenzy intact if they don't have some support. And then, added with Throt the Unclean, we got Brood Horrors. These are very fast single entities, and they do some very nice armor-piercing damage, and they're poison. In groups, these things can be very dangerous. You can use them to run in, start getting multiple attacks in on enemy single entities or just infantry blobs. These guys aren't terribly survivable because they only have 40 armor, but they do regenerate, and they also have Frenzy. So again, if you can keep that low leadership up, you're going to do very well in a melee and be quite useful for you. Then we come to Mutant Rat Ogres, which are a very nice blob-busting AP damage dealer. Now, they could go up against some cavalry, assuming that cavalry doesn't have anti-large itself. And because these guys do good against armor, they're pretty quick moving at 70. They're faster than the standard Rat Ogres. And they come with magic attacks. Again, Frenzy in here as well. And they're a Molder monster, and we'll see what that means because there are some heroes and lords that can buff up Molder monsters. Then we come to the Hell Pit Abomination finally, which is an AP anti-large monster for the Skaven. It does regenerate, and whenever it dies, it coughs up a unit of Skaven Slave Spears, so it can be very annoying. It's a very large target, so it's somewhat vulnerable to missile fire, but it has a little bit of innate resistance. Help with that. It causes fear and terror, and it's very good against large targets. The Hell Pit Abominations are a very powerful single entity monster, and again, nicely rounds out a monster and beast section for the Skaven, which is, I think, one of their strengths. Like I said, even though it doesn't have quite as many entries as, say, the infantry or missile infantry roster. And then moving on to artillery and war machines, we get some really good stuff here. From an artillery standpoint, Skaven, again, don't have a ton of offerings, but what they have is good. Their Plague Claw catapult is long range, and it's very good against tightly packed missile infantry or infantry, and decent against other artillery pieces. The Plague Claw, the Warp Lightning Cannon is next, and this one is excellent against large targets from long range, and it's also, again, not bad against artillery. So this gives the Skaven some supreme range to contend, and you don't want to stand off with the Skaven artillery unless you yourself have very good artillery, because they will win. And remember that they have secondary missile infantry that's also going to be quite good, and typically they can combine the two to some deadly effect. Then we get into the War Machine. Doomflayers are a specific anti-infantry and armor tool. They are very good against factions like Dwarves, and they give the Skaven an excellent tool for fighting the Dwarves in a campaign, so Doomflayers are a must-go-to for Skaven if you're fighting against the Dwarf things. And then you get the Doom Wheel, which is basically the big brother to the Doomflayers. It's been in there for Skaven since the beginning. Another even larger anti-infantry tool, but this one's single entity. However, it does come with some magic ammunition that does some nice AP damage along the way. So that is the Skaven roster. The Skaven are subpar with infantry in terms of quality and ability, good in terms of diversity. Missile infantry, they are excellent. They just have great options with missile infantry. And then in monsters, they're good. In artillery, they are good. So the Skaven have some pretty solid entries. And now let's take a look at their heroes, starting with the Assassin. The Skaven Assassin is a great hero if you're looking to go in and debuff a very specific target. So let's say you're playing campaign or in multiplayer, and you really want to focus out the key units like single entity monsters, heroes, or lords in the enemy army. Well, that's what the Assassin's going to be good for, because they have this Assassin's Trophy ability, which is a really good debuff against melee attack and defense, makes a target very weak. And then you have Rival Hide Talisman, which makes them even weaker. And if you kind of time these where you use one and then use the other, you can keep an enemy lord or hero debuff for a very long time and do a ton of damage. And then they have Concealment Bombs, which makes them very difficult to spot. So the Assassin is a great pick when you're looking to go in and single out key enemy targets for destruction. The Packmaster is going to be our next hero we take a look at, which is good against large when he's unmounted, and good against armor when he's mounted on his Brood Horror, plus the Brood Horror gives them a great deal of speed and then poison attacks. Now, the Packmaster, as far as abilities go, has this Shock Collar, so he can target Molder monsters and make them stronger with the Shock Collar. So remember that Molder monster thing I said? Any unit that has that, this guy can help buff them. Not only that, as long as he is near Molder monsters and he's in melee, he's going to be helping them heal even faster. Some of them have regeneration to begin with, so this is a great way to make those Molder monsters last longer. So maybe you want to bring some Brood Horrors, you should send this guy into melee on the Brood Horror with them, and he'll help buff them and help them regenerate faster. And as far as other abilities go, he can help buff leadership and damage resistance to himself. And then also he's got this Skaven Brew, which gives himself or an ally a lot of extra attack and damage at the cost of armor, but also grants immune to psychology, which can be quite important for Skaven in the right situation. So that is our Packmaster. Then we move on to the Chieftain. The Chieftain on foot is an anti-large, anti-armor tool, and if you put him on the Bone Breaker, just an anti-armor tool. Maybe still decent against large. From an ability standpoint, it has the Guardian ability, which is going to make it give physical resistance to nearby heroes and lords in your own army. It's very useful. There's a map-wide effect that gives extra leadership, so that can be very useful again for the Skaven. And then in terms of other stuff, he's got the Shield of Distraction, which debuffs melee attack within 30 meters. So also, again, pretty useful, and he's got the Skaven Brew as well, we saw earlier. So that's the Chieftain, nice melee hero. And then we come to the Eshin Sorcerer. This is where the magic starts. You're going to have basically this Eshin, you're going to have Plague and Ruin that you're going to see in terms of Skaven magic. And Eshin magic is pretty neat. It was added with Clan Eshin. It's got some really nice spells, this short range magic, I say short range, it's actually pretty long, 200 meters. Magic missile's pretty good, honestly. It's good against a single unit, and it's good against armor. And then you got Skitter Leap, which is really fun because you can basically hide chunks of your army and make it very difficult for the enemy to spot big chunks of your army. And then you've got Veil of Shadows, which is a nice vortex. Doesn't hurt friendlies, but again, it can disrupt an enemy formation. It's not about damage. It's just about kind of ruining an enemy formation. And then you've got the Armor of Darkness, which is a helpful buff of missile resistance and armor for one of your own units. Black Whirlwind, which is a really nice vortex. And then Brittle Bone is a supremely good debuff here at minus 40 melee defense. So imagine combining this with something like your Assassins or Deathmaster Snitch. It is extremely good. So keep an eye on that with the Eshin Sorcerer. And then in terms of these special things that you can pick up in multiplayer, of course you can get lots of stuff in the campaign. But you can see those here, the Speed of Lycos and Fear of Aramar. So that's our Eshin Sorcerer. Now, Plague Priest brings that Plague lore in. They also have a Plague Furnace mount, which makes them an AP anti-infantry tool. And they also cause this Contaminated, which takes away 10 leadership. A good way of debuffing enemy leadership and helping to bust up infantry blobs. And as far as their lore goes, Plague is good at a few things. You got Pestilent Breath, which is a decent wind attack. Blessed with Filth, which gives poison to all of your units around. Wither is great at reducing armor. Vermintide summons a unit of clan rats and can be quite helpful. And then you have Pestilent Birth, which summons a unit of plague months. A lot of people do like the Plague lore to just start summoning a bunch of extra units behind enemy lines, while the Plague Furnace is blasting into enemy infantry. It can be quite useful and quite good at that. Now, Pipes of Piebald here gives extra charge speed, although it takes away some charge bonus. And this is a hex that's constant as long as your unit is engaged in melee. So very odd effect interesting. And then we got Scrying Stone here, which is adding leadership and damage resistance to himself. Now, the Warlock Engineer doesn't have any mounts, but the Warlock Engineer brings the Ruin lore, basically, and then has the Doom Rocket special ability here, which is a magic missile that he can use. Only has one use, though, which kind of sucks for a cost of 113. It's not probably quite good enough, but it is fun to use sometimes, so I don't know. Kind of up in the air. But as far as Ruin goes, Warp Lightning is probably the best spell. At only 6 costs, this thing is terribly damaging. And it can be used a lot during a battle based on the winds of magic you have. Howling Warp Gale is a great way to control flying units for the Skaven. Flying is definitely not something the Skaven do, or at least they don't prefer to unless they're being exploded or thrown into the air by enemy cavalry and monsters. So Howling Warp Gale is a great tool for them. Death Frenzy, which can basically buff up an ally or yourself. And then you got Scorch, which is a decent breath attack. And then Crack's Call, again, a decent wind spell. And then Flensing Ruin, which is a really cool direct damage spell that is good against a single combatant. And as far as abilities, they do have the Warpstone Armor, which is kind of like a Mortis Engine effect. This is a very good option for them. And if they do end up in melee, which they're not great at, but they're not terrible, they'll start to do extra damage in that melee by pulling away enemy hit points. Then, of course, they can help. As long as they're in melee, they will make your units around them a little more resistant to missile fire. So, and last but not least, Gorich is going to be the legendary hero that came in with the Skaven, along with Clan Molder and Throt the Unclean. And Gorich is going to be all focused on damage dealing. And you can see that from his Warp Frenzy and Evisceration, which is kind of like a little vortex thing he does when he spins like a tornado. It's like Tasmanian Devil, kind of. He spins around and does a ton of damage. He's AP and anti-infantry. Great at busting up infantry blobs. So if you're coming up against a faction where you think you're going to have to deal with a lot of armored elite infantry, like Chaos, for instance, Gorich would be a supremely good tool. He also has the Sword of Anti-Heroes to do more damage, and then the Crown of Command to be unbreakable for a short period of time. That is the Skaven heroes. Now let's talk about their lords, and let's start off like usual with generic lords. They have a Warlord, which has a mount on both a Bonebreaker and a Brood Horror. Bonebreaker is armor piercing, a little bit faster at 60. Brood Horror is much faster with poison attacks and armor piercing, but slightly less damage than the Bonebreaker. The Chieftain is a melee specialist, and in terms of their abilities, I want to say they have... No, okay, they don't have any of the debuffs except for the Shield of Distraction, but they do have this thing to give them some extra armor for a short period of time. So, you know, a decent option, I guess, if you're looking for a dollar store queek. And then we've got the Master Assassin, who does have a short-range missile attack that's actually quite good against infantry. And this Assassin does come with some nice debuffs. This Looming Dread, a really nice debuff. And then we've also got over here Rival Hide Talisman, which we've seen before. Again, a very nice debuff. And then you've also got the Sacred Banner of the Horned Rat, which debuffs leadership. So like the previous unit we saw down here with the Assassin, the Master Assassin is just a big boy version of it. AP, anti-infantry damage, and then Weeping Blades take away half of enemy armor. Imagine you're fighting something really high armor, like 120 armor. It takes away 60 armor when you connect with it on the Weeping Blade. That is huge. So the Master Assassin is all about weakening things and helping them to be assassinated. And as we move up the tree here, there's a Greyseer Plague. So if you like this Plague Priest, the Greyseer Plague is basically the same thing as a Lord, except a Screaming Bell instead of a Plague Furnace. But it does a similar job. The same spell lore and the abilities are also going to be somewhat similar. All right, so that is our Plague, Greyseer Plague. Then we got a Greyseer of Ruin, similar to the Plague, except comes with the Ruin spells. So yeah, that's pretty much the only difference there. Again, nothing wild or crazy. And then one last one is our Warlock Master, who's like Dollar Store Icket. Has the same mounts as Icket with a Doom Flayer and a Doom Wheel, or on foot. If on foot, they're AP anti-infantry, and they remain AP anti-infantry on the mounts. And then as far as abilities go, they do have access to Brass Orb, just like Icket does. Very good at helping against infantry blobs, or even a cavalry blob for that matter. And then again, the spells should be consistent with our Warlock Engineer down here as well. All right, so that's the generic lords. The legendary lords, Tretch is pretty crap, but he's also cheap and anti-large. So if you're looking for a small target to kind of run around and make it more irritating for the enemy to kill, Tretch might be the way to go. I don't know, he's pretty bad, honestly. just being honest about it in campaign, maybe you can get some other stuff. But he doesn't have any mounts, so there's nothing exciting there. And yeah, I mean, he just kind of is what he is. Deathmaster Snitch, on the other hand, is kind of fun for some Vanguard deploy shenanigans where you can really get in and do a ton of damage to enemies. He has the Weeping Blades, so again, he can take away 50 armor. Really good weapon strength here, and he's a great duelist, 70 attack and 50 defense. He also has a huge charge bonus at 60. He's pretty quick for a unit on foot. He doesn't have any mounts, but he'll probably make up for it with abilities. Like he's got this Deathmaster Sigil, or Sigil, or however you pronounce that. I don't know how you do it. It's pretty good at helping him when he gets into a unit formation. And then, of course, he's got Concealment Bombs, which make him very difficult to spot. And then over here in special abilities, he's got this Cloak of Shadows, which hurts enemy melee defense and leadership. And then he's also got this Whirl of Weeping Blades, which is a neat little vortex he can do to cause extra damage. So that's Deathmaster Snitch. And then we're going to move into Queek Headtaker. Queek sucked pretty bad until they gave him some updates, and now he's pretty good at infantry blobs with armor piercing and anti-infantry. He has high armor, very high for a Skaven, in fact, and he is kind of difficult to kill. He's also got trophy heads, which is a very nice debuff you can see here. And then he also has access to the Warp Shard armor here, which really hurts enemies around him in terms of armor and melee defense. And you got the Dwarf Gouger too to allow him to do some extra damage for a short period of time. So Queek was vastly improved. Still not a terribly exciting lord because of no mounts, but certainly better than where he was at. Then we come up on Throt the Unclean. Interesting things about him: he is low armor, but he regenerates like a lot of Molder monsters do. He can specifically support Molder monsters well. In fact, he can ride on one. It's a Brood Horror that he's got access to with a little bit extra damage and attack than you see on a typical Brood Horror. And then when we look at his abilities, he's got this Remoldered, where he can heal Molder monsters a lot. And remember, they already regenerate too, so this makes him a great support unit for those Molder monsters. He can even summon a unit of Rat Ogres, which is pretty nuts if used properly. Really useful there. And then he also has this Creature Killer, which can make himself and allies around him better against large and immune to psychology for a short period of time. So a very useful ability from Throt to go against large targets. Then we come up on Lord Skrulk, who was kind of the preeminent Skaven Lord until we got, I think, the final 3 Lords as DLC. Finally, you had other options as Skaven, but prior to that, it was pretty much Skrulk pretty much all the time. And the reason mostly for that is over here on his items, which is the Rod of Corruption, which is good against like blobs of multiple combatants. It's kind of a big anti-blob tool, direct damage. And the Liber Bubonicus, which is really good against individual lords. So while Skrulk couldn't fight back very well against large lords, he could do a ton of damage to them, the Liber Bubonicus. So it kind of made him a little bit of a difficult target. And then he also came with the Lower of Plague here, which means he could do Pestilent Birth and Vermintide to help summon up a bunch of extra units. So he was very useful, and it still is, honestly, a pretty good addition to the Skaven roster. And then we get Ichiklaw, who comes with the Ruin spells. He has AP anti-large, so a little bit different than his Dollar Store variant, which was anti-infantry. He's also got a short-range missile attack that's quite good when he's on foot, and I think he maintains it when he's mounted. He does. Well, he doesn't on the Doom Flayer, but he does get a ranged attack when he's on his Doom Wheel. So anyway, if you're able to get him into position for the short-range missile attack, it's pretty darn damaging, and does pretty well. Not a lot of ammunition, though. But in any case, that's Ichiklaw. He does come with this special Storm Demon magic missile ability, which has a very long range and is good against armor. So he's a good anti-infantry tool when he's mounted and capable against large whenever he's not. Fun addition. So that is the Skaven roster. As far as their roster goes, it was a little bit weak in multiplayer for quite a long time. They started to get a bunch of DLC. They probably got overpowered for a little while. CA nerfed a little bit. And then I think they got brought down into a very good position. Skaven are decent in multiplayer, though they do take a little bit of skill to play because some of their units can't stand up for very long. But in capable hands, they're pretty dangerous in multiplayer. I think where they're best in multiplayer is in team battles. Basically, you get a team that can help protect their range, and the Skaven are absolutely dominant because they can dish out so much range damage, and they're very, very good at it. Their roster overall is in good shape. They're good in campaign. They're good in multiplayer. They really don't need a ton of stuff added. I think the Skaven's roster is perfectly ready for Game 3, and they're in pretty good shape in terms of roster goes. You all can tell me what your thoughts are on the Skaven down in the comments, but I think they're ready for Game 3. they're probably better than any other faction ready for Game 3 for that matter. They got a lot of attention in Warhammer 2, so I guess Creative Assembly is secretly a big fan of the little rat boys because they did get a ton of attention, but they also, in a good way, when they got all this attention, kind of set the bar high for expectations for other factions. So that might be the unexpected benefit of the Skaven getting all that attention. Or if you're a Skaven player, then you are very happy about them getting all that attention. But the real question is, do Ratmen even exist to begin with? I mean, we've been sitting here talking about something that quite possibly doesn't exist. Anyway, let me all know what you think down below. Thank you for watching another State of the Faction video. We don't have many left, folks, just a couple more factions, and I will be getting to them soon. HeirofCarthage, signing out for now.